Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. David Graves, an experienced biblical archaeologist and CEO of Electronic Christian Media. I'm here today with another exciting episode on our Archaeology Discoveries channel, where we discuss important archaeological artifacts related to the Bible. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.
Well, welcome, people. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. And today I got my special guest, Dr. David Graves, and I'm going to read his background. Dr. David Graves is a PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and native of Canada. He has been involved in teaching the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years. He is retired assistant professor from Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity in Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at Oxford University, England, provided tours at the Ashmolean as well as the British Museum, has traveled extensively throughout the Middle East, been involved in the Mount Ararat research, also was consultant for the National Geographic Productions. He has been involved also in archaeology of Qumran, the Temple Mount, and Shiloh, all three in Israel, as well as the Tel El Hammam excavation in Jordan. In 2017, he was part of a team in which he excavated the Dead Sea Scrolls Cave 53. In his excavation, the team has assessed that it once contained actual Dead Sea Scrolls and now has been identified as Q, meaning Qumran 12, Qumran Cave 12. For many years, David has been a field supervisor at the Tel El Hammam excavation. Also, he has been a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society, NEAS. He has authored a number of books published through his company, Electronic Christian Media, ECM. In addition, he has authored a number of journal articles on the Bible and archaeology, most available through academia.ed.edu. Welcome to our program, Dr. David Graves.
As always, George, great to be with you, and look forward to our podcast today.
Me too. Today we are going to talk about a stone, and not a kidney stone.
We both know what those are.
Right. So I'm looking forward to this because I think everybody has heard about the Rosetta Stone. And it's very, I think it's just as well known as the Tomb of King Tut, as far as, events involving Egypt. So, Dr. Graves, I'm all ears today. I'm eager to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, let's dive into it here. I'll share my screen and we can get started with the presentation on the Rosetta Stone. As you mentioned, probably everybody is familiar with the Rosetta Stone. It's one of the most famous artifacts that you can see in the British Museum, and the entire British Museum sort of revolves around this one artifact. The material is found in my book on the archaeology of the Old Testament, and I present the receipts as usual with this. For all the footnotes and research that you want, you can check out the book, and that's available on Amazon.com. In fact, probably by the time you are able to see this, it's also going to be available as a Kindle download for the EPUB folks that want to use it in digital, available through Amazon as well. Well, the Rosetta Stone, that's what it looks like right here. On the right, granite stone with three different, I would say, languages. It's kind of a misnomer. Most people suggest that it speak of it often as a trilingual stone or stele, but in actual fact, it's just bilingual. Well, I'll explain that in a couple of moments. It dates to the 2nd century BC. It comes from a place called Rosetta. That's why it's called the Rosetta Stone. The town of Rosetta and Rashid, discovered in July 19th, 1799 by General Broussard, one of Napoleon's military officers. That's, as I said, currently in the British Museum. In fact, when you go in the front doors, you can almost run into it. Now, just a bit of a background on that. It's in glass or in plexiglass, probably a good thing, because as I was just watching the news today, King Charles's new portrait has been defaced by the protesters. So these days you have to keep the valuable things in plexiglass to keep them from being defaced. So they keep it under wraps, but there's a copy of it in one of the rooms beside the main entrance. So one's a copy and the other one is the real thing. The biblical significance, it unlocks 33,000 years of written Egyptian history. So it has great importance. So it's not so important as to the message that's written on it as to the process that was used to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is what it would have looked like as a stele. It would have been rounded at the top, typical of most steles from the ancient Near East. But this is just a part of it that was broken away. But it gave us enough of it that we can see 3 distinct sections, the upper section, the middle section, and the lower section. And that's going to become important for us in understanding what it's written, how important it is for our understanding of writing. Here's a portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte, oil painting. And Napoleon in 1798 took a commission of science and art officials along with his expedition to Egypt, including 167 professional men in this field. And as I mentioned, Bouchard discovered it in 1799 and then took it to Cairo. The stone was moved to Cairo when Napoleon had it copied, and when the French surrendered Egypt to the British in 1801, the Rosetta Stone also passed into British hands and is preserved in the British Museum today. If they hadn't won the war, it probably would be in the Louvre, and the French would still have it. But it's a bit of a trophy of war. The French gave it to Britain after the war, probably as a sign of good faith. And some consider this the beginning of scientific archaeologies. Others say not. Irrespective, it was certainly a monumental breakthrough for archaeology, and I'll explain why that's the case in just a moment. Here's a famous painting of Bonaparte before the Sphinx in Egypt. And here are some of his soldiers as they're marching up toward the pyramids. So they were doing a lot of research over there at the time. And the British under Nelson, Sir Horatio Nelson, defeated the French under Napoleon's fleet at Aboukir Bay, and the French surrendered Egypt to the British in 1801, and the Rosetta Stone passed from the French hands into the British hands. There are some famous paintings. This is what the British Museum looked like in the lower left. In the 17th century, Hans Sloane's house was actually turned into the British Museum, which is an interesting story in and of itself. He took his collection of antiquities and basically turned it into a museum. And then the present-day British Museum was created to house his house full of artifacts. This is what it looks like at the British Museum today. And this is what it looks like in the other room. This is a reproduction, replica of it. So you can get up close and touch this one where you can't touch the original one. But it's full size, a great reproduction. It's really interesting to get up close to it and look at it. This is the photo I took in the History of Science display at the British Museum. So what I want to point out right now is that the upper portion are 14 lines of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Basically, it's called hieroglyphics, means sacred writing. And that's what a close-up of it looks like with one of the cartouches. And then the middle section is Egyptian Demotic, the Greek word meaning people of the town. In other words, it was the shorthand or the common language in writing spoken and written by the common people of the town. And that's what it looks like from the Rosetta Stone there. So it's a shorthand. So really these two are not two separate languages. It's the same language. That's why I consider the Rosetta Stone to be bilingual, not trilingual. So it's got Egyptian hieroglyphics and Demotic. And they didn't know what these two languages read at the time of its discovery. So they had to figure that out. Well, how do they do that? Well, the bottom section was in Koine Greek, the language of the people, 54 lines of that. And so that's what the Greek looks like. So they went from the known to the unknown. That's a phrase we often hear in archaeology. When we're excavating, we go from the known to the unknown. You have 3 stones, you have a wall. And you go from the known wall to the unknown in the dirt and see what it tells you. And this is exactly what they did here. They knew how to read the Greek. Greek was well known. And now they just have to figure out the Egyptian hieroglyphics. And this was the clue that unlocked the secrets of the Egyptian hieroglyphic language and Demotic. The 3 characters that were involved were de Soucy, Thomas Young, and Jean-Francois Champollion. I've colorized some of these images for my book on the history of biblical archaeology. So they're the 3 characters and individuals who deciphered it and figured out the code. Jean David Archibald as well was involved with this. So the first individual is Thomas Young, and here's his hieroglyphic code letters where he's trying to decipher it. We see some of the names down the bottom. Ptolemy was really one of the clues because when they knew the name Ptolemy in the Greek, the hieroglyphics had the name in a cartouche, which is basically a round circle with hieroglyphics in it. And that became the name of the pharaoh at the time. So that's one of the clues that led him to deciphering how this all could happen. And of course, it's all documented. A god, a goddess, and how these different words and the symbols in the Egyptian hieroglyphics were used as specimens. He realized that a sign could represent both an idea and a sound, which is interesting, and failed to see, however, that the Egyptian writing was a paraphrase and not literal translation. So he was trying to decipher it as a literal translation. Anybody out there that's familiar with the American Standard Version of the Bible, that's more of a literal translation from the Hebrew and the Greek, whereas we have a paraphrase. The Living Bible is a paraphrase, so it's not word for word, but sort of tries to capture the general idea. And that's actually how they had translated this into the Greek, was a paraphrase and not just a literal. And Young failed to recognize that. And so Champollion was the one who cracked that code. And this is one of the pages of 2,000 pages of the inscriptions in his own handwriting, where he deciphered some of the Egyptian hieroglyphics and what they meant. So in 1828, Champollion read his book before the Academy of Inscriptions in London and proved the accuracy of the decipherment of the hieroglyphics, showing how it could be deciphered. So here's Cleopatra and how he deciphered the different names from Ptolemy. Ptolemy here in the top cartouche and Cleopatra in the bottom cartouche. So the thing to remember about this Rosetta Stone is that until 1822, Egyptian history, as derived from the inscriptions on the walls of the tombs and tablets, lay silent in a mystical sequence of fascinating pictures. The brilliant work of Champollion and others with the Rosetta Stone opened the way into 3,000 years of written Egyptian history, essential for the study of the humanities and biblical studies. So it's not so important what was written on the tablet, on the stone, about the history that was recorded here. Its importance is that it gave us the ability to decipher how to read Egyptian hieroglyphics. And so now we're able to go back and read 3,000 years of history and opened up an entire new world for us in this field of Egyptian history and meaning. And of course, the benefit of biblical history and studies is just invaluable. At this point, I want to just introduce what I might talk about next week, and this is the Behistun inscription. And this is a large wall with an inscription on it, but it has a similar trilingual inscription that helped to unlock the reading of cuneiform. So the Babylonian Akkadian was unknown and Elamite was unknown, but because they knew the Old Persian, they were able to use the Old Persian and do the exact same thing that they did with the Rosetta Stone and figure out how to read cuneiform. And there's a fascinating story about how they were able to prove that. And I'll talk about that perhaps next week in our upcoming podcast. But I just wanted to lead into this. What the Rosetta Stone did for Egyptian hieroglyphics, the Behistun inscription did for Babylonian, Akkadian cuneiform. And that unlocked an entire wealth of tablets and information that was up until that point unknown and unreadable. So these are two very important discoveries, and that's my take on the mystery of the Rosetta Stone and a short history of how it was used to decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics, unlocking our wealth of information. Okay, George, do you have any questions?
Oh, sure. Come on.
Yeah, it's fun.
But I thought the slides are fantastic and it's easy to follow. I mean, I like how you talked about the hieroglyph and then you displayed the hieroglyph and then the demontic, you displayed the demontic, and underneath that the Greek. Then the Greek. Perfectly, understandable what was going on. So the Greek language was known, and they used the Greek language in relation to the hieroglyph, and they started to do a comparison. And little by little, they started unraveling it. And then you had a competition between the British and the French. The British was Thomas Young, and the French was Champollion.
That's right.
And so here they were trying to see who would decipher it the first. And now the only way Champollion could have got copies, of the Rosetta Stone was by rubbings, because after the battle, I think it's called the Battle of the Nile, that was in the Mediterranean by Egypt. It's called the Battle of the Nile. And then they had another battle. And I thought this was interesting. I'm kind of sidetracking, but it's interesting. It's called the Battle of the Pyramids.
Yeah.
Another very decisive battle between the French and the British that is actually fought in a melon patch. Now,
Yes.
Who wants to be a part of the Battle of the Melon Patch? Well, nobody, but the Battle of the Pyramids, absolutely. So they call it the Battle of the Pyramids. It was fought nowhere near the pyramids. I thought that's interesting. So, but back to Champollion. So he's going to get a rubbing of it. So they take ink or whatever, and they would put it on or roll it on the Rosetta Stone, then take paper, thin paper over top of it, and then press on top of that, kind of like you would rub if you ever rubbed a penny or a coin when you were little to get the impression. Very similar to that.
Now,
And
now, George, for the Behistun inscription, they used a squeeze. So it would take like a paper mache, and they would mix it up and they would squeeze it into the inscription, let it dry and peel it off, and then would have a negative and a impression of that. And so they did that a lot of times. What's significant is some of the mice get into it in the British Museum and have destroyed some of the squeezes that they've taken. Anyway, that's a whole nother story, but lots of fun stuff. That's all in my book on the history of our biblical archaeology. But to go back to your point, that's how they were able to preserve a lot of these inscriptions and things, was with these squeezes and rubs that they would take. So yeah, carry on.
Well, that's what Champollion had to work with.
Yeah,
because the Rosetta Stone was lost to the British, and like you said, now it's in the British Museum rather than the Louvre.
yes.
And so,
Now,
but for years we thought. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Something else I didn't point out is that the folks would, if we go back to the PowerPoint, you'll notice that the Greek is in what we call uncial, which is all capital letters, and there's no spaces between the words. So it's a little more difficult to read for modern people. I read Greek, but it's a challenge sometimes to be able to pick out what the words are. It's like if you took a sentence and you took all the spaces out and then try and read it, some of the words can sort of be blend together. But that's very common for all the ancient inscriptions that we find. Most of them are all in capitals and with no spaces. That's classic Koine Greek.
That's interesting to know that maybe conserving space. Maybe that was the reason why.
Mm-hmm.
But for years we thought that the Rosetta Stone was black, possibly a basalt, because of all the ink they used in the rubbings. And then they were cleaning the Rosetta Stone. They found out that it wasn't basalt at all. The darkness was the ink that was being used over the years for the rubbing. But the British, that's how the British got their Rosetta Stone, is actually through winning a battle. They lost the Rosetta Stone. But it is very fascinating that they used to slowly decipher. I think the advantage that Champollion had over Thomas Young, both were very skilled in learning different languages.
Yeah.
But Champollion found out, he came up with the idea that he could use Coptic to translate the stone, because Coptic is a form of Egyptian, but they were using the Greek alphabet for pronunciation.
Yes.
So he went to the Coptic church and learned Coptic and thought that, some of the ancient Egyptian pronunciation was preserved through the Coptic church, which helped him actually translate the stone. I thought that was fascinating. You're walking by and you hear the Coptics in there and they're singing a hymn. And he says, they're using Greek, but Greek was on the lower level. You say Koine Greek was on the lower level of the stone. And of course, the Coptics were current in using the Greek because of the ceremonies. And so I thought that part of it was very fascinaking.
And figuring out that it wasn't, word for word transliteration, it was a paraphrase. So they had to go with the names of the pharaohs. So as I pointed out, Cleopatra, Ptolemy, their names were in the Greek. They could find the cartouches in the Egyptian, and then they began putting those letters together and figuring out and deciphering it that way. So they did a masterful job on it. And it takes a a village to make, or it takes a lot of people to make a village. And this is the case in point here, where we have a number of scholars coming together, sharing their research with one another, and then they finally deciphered it and unlocked, 3,000 years of Egyptian history.
Right.
So just think about that. Up until what? In the 1700s, well, basically 1800. So for the past, 1924 years or 1,000 years, we didn't know what the Egyptians had written about, and we didn't know anything about their culture and their religion and their. But now we have unlocked that entire catalog of history to being able to be deciphered and translated. So, just an amazing discovery. We have the software today called the Rosetta Stone, named after that, for
Right.
use of translation in different languages. So this has had an immeasurable influence on our understanding of the ancient cultures.
It's interesting to note that the replacement of like the cuneiform, like in the Behishta inscription, and hieroglyphs for the Egyptians was replaced by the alphabet, whether the Latin alphabet or the Greek alphabet. But early on, it would be the Proto-Sinaitic alphabet.
Yes.
Of course,
and then the Demotic is a shorthand. So they said that the Egyptian, hieroglyphs was, the scribes were writing that and it was taking too much time, and they had to come up with a shorter way of doing it. It's like a cursive. And so they started to write it quicker and faster and took a shortcut. And that's what the Demotic is in the middle. Of course, the average person could read that when they couldn't read the Egyptian hieroglyphics. So this is really important for unlocking all two of the three languages that heretofore were unreadable.
Well, it is pretty fascinating, and of course the hieroglyphs are extremely colorful. It's all the little images, and but like you said, there's more to it because hieroglyph means sacred carving.
Yeah,
but that's what I think. That's what we call it, because it's in a cartouche. You read a name in a cartouche, a royal name in a cartouche. But a cartouche, I think, is a French word, and it comes from the word cartridge, because they were loading the rifles and they thought it looked like the cartridge that they were feeding into the rifles. So they said, well, what is this? So they had to give it a name. So it's actually French.
And the other thing to realize is that the hieroglyphs and all of the pyramid tombs were painted bright colors. We see some of them, but normally we don't, so it was a form of art for the Egyptians to represent their writing as art and not just simply as a linguistic formation.
Yeah. I never knew that for the longest time. I always thought, wouldn't it be enough just to carve in stone all those little figures? And then to turn around and said, well, somebody painted them. And they went back and painted each little figure, and each one could have a designated color. Like if you're a foreigner, you might be yellow, but if you're Egyptian, you were a darker orange. And if you were like Nubian, black, if you will, it would be also a different color. So they had colors designating different people from different places, along with their fashion.
And we know that from the remnants of the pigments that we have still on many of them. So we know they were colored because the colors are still there in some of them, especially in the tombs where the light hasn't gotten to them.
So I think to me, I thought, like, at first I didn't believe it when somebody said, oh, they painted those. I think, like, why would you do that? Why would you paint your alphabet? To me, it's like when you make the letter A, you always make your A in red, and your B's got to be in blue, and the Y's got to be yellow. And that's kind of like, indirectly what they were doing. If you're going to do that, you got to do it the right way.
And it reflected the stones. So the red was carnelian, the blue was lapis lazuli, and the yellow was more the ochre from the soil, from the ground.
So it's totally fascinating.
I
Culture.
I drew a lot of these Egyptian paintings on the walls in my basement one time, and for my border around the top of my room, I painted the Egyptian hieroglyphs and painted them all nice bright colors.
Well, that would be quite the achievement. I did this one lady, she was married to an attorney, and she had her little room too that was set up like it was Egyptian and Egyptian style. And of course, she invited people in, and of course, they'd have to see her room. And she had a small collection of little Egyptian ushaptis.
Yeah,
She have a little ushapti set up, but this ushapti is those little figures, Egyptian servant figures that look like
that's right.
mummies.
Yeah.
But the word ushapti in itself is Greek.
Oh, yes.
It means something like "here I am." It's like a servant. Well, hey, where's so and so? And he goes like, "Well, here I am." It's like maybe calling like your son or your daughter. I said like, "Hey, where you at, Johnny?" And Johnny says, "Look, here I am." So the Shopti, and they'd have like 365 in a tomb. I'm going off subject, but anyway, very colorful culture. And boy, I got a Ushapti sitting here too. Well, it's way over there on the shelf, so I'd like to show people these things. Anyway, you got the coffin back there. Be happy, be happy. But
Yeah, well, next week we'll talk about the Behistun inscription and the significance of that, and how they figured out that they could read it and prove it. There's a contest that they were into, and that'll be a lot of fun.
yes. Now, originally, I had a green screen figure behind me, so I couldn't do this, but now I can. Yeah, since we were talking about the Rosetta Stone.
George the
How's
Pharaoh.
this? I need something like there we go, something like this. All right, everybody. This is a good point to sign off, right? Dr. Graves, thank you for your time, the presentation, PowerPoint, very colorful, entertaining as always. I learned about the Rosetta Stone. And everybody, remember to like and subscribe. I'll see you the next time. Dr. Graves, have a great day.
You too. Thanks, George.
All
See
right,
you next
thank
week.
you.